Hello and welcome to the Better Gaming Podcast, an event and podcast series dedicated to all aspects of ethical gambling as we discuss how we can make gambling and gaming safe, secure and socially balanced for everyone. My name is Jim and I'm the host of this show, and in this episode I'm talking to Matthew Rogers. Hello, Matthew.
Hello, Jim. Hello. Nice to meet you.
Thank you. So you popped up in my LinkedIn feed, whereas I'm a relative newbie to the gambling world, your LinkedIn profile has you steeped in experience from, well, stretching back, is it more than 20 odd years?
Yes, you're making me feel extremely old now. Slightly more than, let's call it 30 years experience in the gambling industry now. So hopefully there's not too many grey hairs showing on the camera today. But yeah, 30 years. I started out way back, 1994, when the gambling industry was very different. I was literally, prior to turning 18, I was a 17-year-old lad, not doing very much of my life except for making sure I had money in my pocket for the weekend. My father said to me they're opening a new betting shop over the other side of town, where those of us old enough to remember John McCreary was doing the grand opening day. And yes, that's where Stanley passed away. A bit Marmite though, wasn't he, John McCreary, glowing Warrington. And also Grand National winning jockey Mick Fitzgerald. So he said, why don't you go over there? You're not doing anything else today. Introduce yourself. My father was a bookmaker himself in the 60s and the 70s, as was my mother. So you could say gambling's in the blood. I went over there, introduced myself, had an interview a couple of days later, something like that, and started off job as a trainee assistant in independent bookmakers, and it literally started from there in 1994.
Okay, great. So from there it went from retail and then moved into more on the training side, and that's kind of the reason why I was really interested in talking to you, because just as I go on my sort of education, as it were, I'm starting to believe in the importance of qualified and responsible staffing in gambling companies. That helps them to make them become more ethically balanced. And I wanted to dig into how trainers and educators within the big companies can raise the standards for the whole industry. So how did you switch from that retail into the training field?
Sort of short version of the long story is I went from there to work for William Hills when I was 21. There was opportunities in and around South London, so I applied. Up until 2005, when the Gambling Act came in, I was very much in operations, area manager roles in South and North London eventually. The Gambling Act then came in 2005, and I developed a reputation as being somebody, rightly or wrongly, as somebody very patient with people, always had plenty of time to help new members of staff, existing members of staff. Don't know where that reputation came from as being very patient, but yeah, somehow I got that. And they said, look, this Gambling Act is coming in. It's going to completely revolutionise the industry, really focus on player protection, harm minimisation, all sorts of other bits and pieces to it, which we won't go into today. We don't have time. We need people to deliver training in the classroom to basically every single member of staff. And I was allocated South London and the South East, and we had to train everybody on the Gambling Act. And the Gambling Act is based on the three principles to protect children and vulnerable people from harm, to ensure gambling is free from crime and disorder, and to ensure gambling is conducted in a fair and open way. And they're the sort of three golden rules of a licensed operator. Nothing that a gambling operator does can contradict any one of those. But it sort of confused me then, and it still baffles me now, why we needed a Gambling Act to tell us to operate our business in a fair and open way. It should be a given. Why do we need to be told to, protect children and other vulnerable persons? It's a foundation cornerstone of every business. If you don't look after your customers will simply go elsewhere. And especially in the gambling industry, it's that competitive now. The market is so competitive. If you don't look after your customers, they will go elsewhere. And it was a sort of no-brainer for me, really, because I thought, well, I don't need to be told how to train this out, because working in the gambling industry up until that point, my father being in it, my mother being in it, it's an industry that I'm very proud to work for. But with the Gambling Act 2005, it brought some great things, such as better player protection, but it brought some controversial things as well, such as advertising on the TV, advertising on billboards, football matches, those type of things. So the Gambling Act very much, for want of a better term, thrust gambling down people's throat a bit too much. And that's just my honest opinion. And because of that, newspapers got hold of it, and the gambling industry has very quickly developed a bad reputation as being greedy, corrupt, and just trying to get people's money no matter what the outcome. And I felt, I don't know, a sense of duty to defend that, to say, no, this is not how it is. This is not how it was. When I first started in the industry working in betting shops, and betting shops now, if you walked into a betting shop and it's on a local estate and it's a well-established shop, you could ask the staff about any of their customers and they will say, oh yeah, that's John. He works for the local council. He's been married to his wife for 27 years. He drives a whatever. They know more about their customers than some of their husbands and wives. So it's an industry that I felt proud of. I didn't like the way it was coming under attack because of certain elements of it. Back in 2005, and if I go back slightly earlier to October 2001, where the introduction of gross profit tax was introduced. Short version of the long story is bookmakers used to be taxed on their turnover, not their profit. So a shop could take £30,000 in a week, but all the customers' horses won that week, and they paid out 80 grand, so they lost 50 grand. They'd still be taxed on that 30,000. And that was typically 9% or 10%, depending on which government was in power. So you couldn't have products in betting shops like roulette, casino products like blackjack, where they have a profit margin of 2.5%. If you're paying 9% tax on your turnover, because you're losing 6.5% for every pound, aren't you?
Yeah.
All of a sudden, you could. And there was a lot of people in the industry, I don't mind saying it, with a lot of short-term thinking, who saw this as a very quick and easy way to make a lot of money out of customers by having these products, with disregard to the consequences. To get to the point, like I said, I felt a sort of duty to defend the industry because I've been in it for that period of time. My father was in it since the 60s, and I still want to be in it in 20, 25 years' time. And if we don't do something about it now, to actually get the right information out there and the right education to people out there, it's going to cause a lot of damage. It really is.
Yeah. And just with regards to that, when the Gambling Act came in, obviously there would have been training prior to that for all of those responsibilities, what you're talking about with vulnerable people, proceeds of crime. So were you sort of starting from scratch or just building on existing materials and tailoring it?
No, the Gambling Act training came in. There was an awful lot of player protection in place already, but it was informal. If a customer in a betting shop was, for example, experiencing problems with their gambling, spending too much, relationship problems, putting their job at risk, etc., staff would always talk to that customer anyway and give them sort of friendly pieces of advice and help. When certain things, there was formal procedures that were put in with the Gambling Act, such as self-exclusion, where a customer could fill in a form and effectively ban themselves for a period of, it was 6 months at the time. It's now a year. I think we went up to a maximum of 5 years at one point, which was very difficult to police because people's appearance changes quite a lot. But the staff were trained to approach that customer if they were self-excluded and obviously politely ask them to leave the shop. But the training materials that we were given were provided to us, crikey, in my memory, by the Association of British Bookmakers. Yes, the Association of British Bookmakers sent us a DVD. It wasn't his cheesy one with.
Hang on. Was it a DVD or was it? Because my memory, I think we were probably roughly about the same age. Was it a CD-ROM?
You might be right. Yes.
It could be a.
It might well have been. It was literally, yes, I think you're correct. Yes. It wasn't VHS or Betamax, I can assure you.
Well, that's good. Yeah, we bought ourselves about 10, 15 years on that one, haven't we?
Yeah, that's right. But they said this, and it lasted, it was about 3/4 of an hour, if my memory serves me right. And a very rough overview of what's new, such as self-exclusion is new, the fixed odds betting terminals, the gaming machines in shops. You only allow 4 of those maximum per shop. Only certain products. You have to have rules in your customer area so the customer knows, for example, maximum payouts, what would happen in the event of a dispute on his or her bet, that type of thing. Whereas before, there wasn't a requirement to have that. You didn't have to have rules in the shop. I remember one shop over in Essex, I won't name it, didn't have rules posters up in the shop. Customer won something like 40 grand. And this is in some point in the 80s. Next day he came in to collect his winnings. There was a rules poster out saying maximum payout 10 grand on the horses. So,
No,
yes, there was some quite unscrupulous things that used to happen. But yeah, the Gambling
yeah,
Act came in, the CD-ROM was sent through, and I was at William Hills at the time, and I had to literally put together the materials, which was in them days PowerPoint, which was a relatively interesting.
yeah. Okay, so it was so you primarily delivered it. So you primarily delivered it via presentations to staff internally, right?
Yeah, it was all done back in them day in the classroom. So it was literally, bums on set. Every person had to attend a training session in various locations. So depending on where the staff were based, whether it was in Kent or Sussex or South London or wherever it was, we had various training venues, and each session would, depending on the size and location, range from ideally at least a dozen people, but I think there was a couple of sessions where I had something like 50 or 60 people turn up, which is great, because it's logistically hard, obviously, because the shop still needed to run each day, smoothly, but everybody had to attend a day-long classroom session on the gambling app.
Okay. How do you make sure that the training is engaging, but it also has an impact on the end game? And the end game is going back to those points that you were saying about why the Gambling Act was created.
Yeah, that's a good question. And we've sort of learned the hard way what training is engaging and isn't engaging, like yourself. When we used to deliver PowerPoint presentations, come 4 o'clock at the end of the day, there was a few tired-looking eyes, should we say, which just struggled to concentrate. And it's the same with e-learning courses. I mean, e-learning courses can be really bad or they can be really good. And what we've found over the course of X amounts of years is e-learning needs to be in, I didn't make this term up, so I won't take credit for it. It needs to be in digestible chunks, because nobody sits there, or nobody wants to sit there and do an e-learning module that lasts an hour and then do a multiple choice quiz at the end, which says, yes, you've passed or yes, you've failed. That really is just evidence of a firm doing a complete tick box exercise, doing it because they have to. And that just doesn't work for anybody. So what we've done is we've turned e-learning from a PowerPoint on steroids version where you just click on read, to these digestible chunks where, to put it in a simple way, you'd have a module split over 4. And the first one will be a studio-style learning. And this is something I'm a massive fan of, because if you watch BBC News, Sky Sports News, or if you're sad like me, the Golf Channel, you'll see the presentation will be somebody standing there with, and I don't think there's ever anything on their clipboards, but they're standing there with their clipboards and they're reading and there's imagery in the background. And that's the way that we absorb information now. And when was the last time you sat there and read the Times or the Sunday Times from start to finish? People don't learn like that. People don't take information on that. They watch YouTube shorts. They watch clips on BBC News on their smartphone. That's the way that we absorb information now. So we split these e-learning modules, which has the same level of information and content, into these digestible chunks and put it in the format of either, like I say, studio-style learning. Something is a bit marmitey, you might hate it, is cartoon-style imagery. We had it using a bit of an experiment with manga style imagery, the Japanese art form of manga.
Yeah.
That seemed to go down quite well because it's different. It's not something we'd repeat year after year, but there needs to be variety in the learning. And something that we were looking to introduce was also, it's like virtual reality. I don't know if you might have one. I know my son wants one, £400. I think they cost, unfortunately, for Christmas. Is the virtual reality.
Yeah, the Meta Quest. Yeah, Meta Quest 3, yeah.
I don't know how much it costs. I don't know much about this. But when you would literally, I'll give you an example of what we were looking to do. In the example of a betting shop, you'd put these things over your eyes and you'd walk into a betting shop and there'd be a virtual reality character over there, another one over there, member of the public playing the fruit machine, playing the slots machine there, staff over there, somebody having a coffee there. And you would go up to, and it's weird, you'd go up to somebody and you'd say hello, and that person would say something, and then you would react in one of 3, 4, 5 ways, depending on what the circumstances is. And it might be the person says, no, I'm not, I've lost all wages today or something like that. And then you would decide what to say to that person. And then depending on what you said, your reaction might be A, B, or C from that customer. Because if you said something aggressive or confrontational to that person, that might be the reaction you get back. If you say something non-confrontational, do you want to sit down and have a cup of tea and talk about it or something like that, it puts you in that scenario, albeit in a virtual reality situation. And we found that to be very popular. It's quite costly and it's still a little bit clunky, but that's the route we were going down, where people are not click and read, multiple choice. They're actually immersing themselves into that environment to try and help customers.
Yeah, and I think it's one of these ones where different people engage with different training modules in different ways. So, for example, for me, I'd probably like the new technology element more so than sort of like the tried and tested ones, or alternatively, if I felt that didn't work for me, I'd probably be more into, just give me 10 pages of an 8. And I know I'm probably the outlier in this in so much that people don't like this, but I'd be more like, give me 10 pages of text and I'll just sit down for half an hour, read it, make sure I've taken it all in and then walk off. I guess you've got to just get that blend right of being the most impactful across the widest spectrum of employees within the organisation, right?
Yes, and a lot depend on the subject matter as well. Because if you're trying to teach people operational procedures, for example, where the answer is black and white, then yes, that procedure could work. You could give them like you say, a 10-page manual where you read it and then you answer the questions. But when it comes to the important subject of harm minimization, player protection, knowing your customers, long-term sustainability with your customers, where there's sometimes not a right or wrong answer. There's a way of doing things. There's different approaches. It's not about teaching people 1 and 1 equals 2. It's about teaching people these personal skills, which I think, and this is just my opinion, I think are gradually being, not, I wouldn't say lost, but they're not as natural to the younger generation as when I was growing up. Because, again, I feel quite old and say this, but we didn't have smartphones. We didn't have tablets. We didn't text. If your mate was in the room, you didn't text them. You spoke to them. And you see it with kids now walking home from school. 2 mates walking home from school, and then neither of them talking to each other. They're on a smartphone, which is the modern world. But it's a shame because it makes those personal skills harder to develop naturally. And that's what training when it comes to player protection and harm minimization is to be, is getting people in that environment and where they're looking to help customers if they need help, or encourage safer gambling right from the offset before throwing them in the deep end.
Yeah, I guess it's the subtleties or the nuances of somebody's reply if you're doing face-to-face engagement with a customer. That's kind of one of the challenges on it. Then on the flip side, I guess, is in your experience working, because you've done, it's Will Hills, Jennings Bet and Entain more recently, right?
Yes, yeah. So, it's little bookmakers called Crullen Bookmakers, but I doubt anybody's ever heard. Then it was William Hills, then it was Jennings Bet, then Entain. Yes.
Okay, and just across all 3 of those, was there a requirement? Because I know in other sectors, you get CPD points, the amount of hours that you do in terms of sort of training and career development. Is there either A, a requirement on that front within the gambling industry, or B, do the larger companies sort of commit to a set amount of hours per employee for this sort of training facility to help with the education of the Gambling Act and the impact it has?
The measurement isn't really in time spent training. The measurement has always been in the detail of the training, depending on the person's job role, because there is a requirement. I never like using the term "there is a requirement" because it sounds like we do, in the gambling industry, we do it because we're required to do it. It is desirable. Let's say it's desirable. It is, to the long-term sustainability of any gambling operator to have every member of staff trained to the level of his or her needs relevant to the business. So, to put that to give you some examples, we have, for example, at Entain or William Hills or any gambling operator has a IT engineer whose literal job is fixing laptops for people who work on the company or fixing IT problems, that sort of thing. They never engage with the customer. Customers never speak to them. They don't have any sight of customer activity online. Then they have a basic foundation level need to understand, what is safer gambling, what does problem gambling potentially manifest itself as, Why is it in our interest to promote safer gambling? To name just a few. So that's sort of basic foundation level. Then if you go to the other end of the spectrum at previous operators, we had teams such as what's called a player protection team. Again, I never used to be a big fan of that term, player protection, because it sounds like gambling is something that people need protected from. It's not. That's another subject. But a player protection team, their job is solely day to day to talk to customers who have either developed or are potentially beginning to develop problems with their gambling, whether it's the amount of time they spend gambling, the amount of money they spend gambling, or for any other reasons like that. They need to receive the highest level of training when it comes to safer gambling. You know, the Gambling Act, the signs to look out for, where, like you rightly said earlier, if somebody says to you, yes, I'm fine, then it's about giving them enough time, that customer, to actually realise, actually, I'm not fine, and opening up. We train them as well, the customer services and the people that talk to our customers, to encourage safer gambling at all times. And, I'll give you some examples. We don't want a customer betting, for example, let's say £500 on an even money shot. Yeah. We would much rather have a customer spend £5 on a 10 football team accumulator than £500 on even money shot, because an even money shot mathematically is more likely to win. And if that customer wins, they think this is a way of making money. And that is a key, in my opinion, again, a key factor when it comes to problem gambling. If ever a customer starts thinking gambling is a way of winning money or making money, that becomes a problem. They need to always understand that it's not a way of making money, not a way of winning money. It's meant to be what it is. It's meant to be fun. So we would much rather have that customer have a £5 bet on 8 teams, football teams at the weekend, and 5 of them win, 6 of them win, but 2 or 3 of them don't. They've only lost a £5. They've had a bit of fun. They've gone down the list and they've said, yeah, Arsenal won at the weekend. Yeah, Man City won at the weekend. No, Sheffield United let me down, that sort of thing. But they've lost a £5. It's not the end of the world. They carry on. Whereas if they bet £500 on even money shot and it loses, that's a big amount of money for somebody to lose. I don't care who you are. So we get our player protection team, customer services team, to encourage safer gambling, to convince customers, and we're not, telling any lies, that what they want is the same as what we want as a gambling operator. We want them to have fun. If they stop having fun and it becomes a problem for them, then it becomes a problem for us, doesn't it? Because we risk losing that customer, and the chances are they'll just go somewhere else and not address the problem. Yeah. So hopefully that makes sense. It's not about hours in training, it's about the level of detail that people need to conduct to do their jobs effectively.
What were your big internal challenges when delivering this training?
With regards to classroom-based training, from when I first started at Entain, a challenge that I was faced with, and we beat it, was people that were speaking to customers, whether customer services or the player protection team. There was a very formal structure, almost like a script of what people should say and shouldn't say to customers. So if ever a customer said something that was slightly not the norm, they didn't really know where to look. So the message that I was delivering when I was delivering the safe gambling training to these customer services teams and player protection when I first started was, throw away the shackles, forget your script. You've got to have empathy, not a set structure. Imagine you're that customer. How would you want to be treated? What would you like somebody to say to you? That sort of thing. So that was the challenge of the classroom-based training. There was too much scripting and not enough freedom for people to have empathy with customers.
Yeah, it is one of those tricky ones, though, isn't it? Whereby the less you write down for those sort of like little subtleties and those nuances, the less you write down, the more that is open for interpretation in terms of people either misreading a situation or not reacting or responding in the correct manner. So
yeah,
it's a bit of a tricky one. So how do you see, is training something that you're looking to stay into or continue with? And how do you see it? How do you see it changing or do you see it changing in the next sort of 5 years?
Without a crystal ball, the way I hope it changes is a bit more pre-COVID, because during the COVID period, obviously everything was done through Teams or Zoom, amongst other platforms as well. And all of a sudden, there was too much of a thought process was, we don't need classroom-based training. We can do everything now through Teams or through Zoom, which, if you're looking at cutting costs, yes, is great. But I think there are certain elements of training, certain subject matters that are that important and that crucial to your business that the financial sacrifice is non-negotiable. People need to be in a classroom. So I'm hoping the level of classroom-based training increases somewhere near pre-COVID days. I'm hoping that especially the gambling industry, continues to look at more modern ways of delivery of the way people absorb information now. So like I say, less e-learning, more studio-style newsroom, Sky Sports News bulletins, that sort of thing, because what you don't want to do is have people in a classroom in January and then come April, you've got to get them all back again because something's changed. And you can use that studio-style learning for dates of information. So I'm hoping more classroom-based training and more innovative ways than just click and read. I looked into.
So what, just regard to that, events and travel, which are two sectors that I knew prior to doing this lottery, were two that were heavily hit by COVID. Obviously, what with the lockdowns, and then travel just in terms of sort of like the bans until it opened up. And there's conflicting data just at the moment whether we're actually at pre-COVID levels for events, and likewise with travel. But it is swinging back. I do feel that the further we move along this line, the more people are. I think that switch to digital events and Teams meetings was sort of a knee-jerk and a necessary thing. But I sense as time gets on, people are more open to attending events. It's not so much of a blanket ban, and the same with travel as well. What was the percentage beforehand of the training that was classroom-based versus digital prior to COVID, and where do you think it sits now post-COVID?
Good question. I mean, COVID hits a year after I started at Entain. And in that year, I would say in that year before COVID hit properly, 80% of training was delivered in an actual physical classroom. I mean, all the personal management license holders at Entain, they attended classroom-based training. All the new starters, all new employees at Entain, they attended classroom-based induction. So as high as 80% was delivered in the classroom. I worked with a company called Epic Global Solutions.
Yeah.
With Entain, for anybody who doesn't know Epic Global Solutions, they are made up of primarily people who have got actual first-hand experience of gambling-related harm, in a lot of cases serious gambling-related harm, and they share their experiences. So we get our staff trained not only from the operator side of things, but from the customer side of things. And it was really good for them to share the signs to look out for when somebody is developing a problem with their gambling. But it also, on a positive light, showed these people, the customer service agents, player protection team, just how good a job they're doing, just how important it is to minimize gambling-related harm. And we did, I'm trying to think of numbers here, something like, well over 1,000 people over the course of 10, 11 months attended actual classroom-based training alongside Epic. COVID hit, and all of a sudden we had to turn all that content into e-learning, which is very difficult because in the classroom-based environment, you can read people's reactions. You can ascertain whether people are interested, engaged, whether they're enthusiastic. And even with teams where, even if you insist people's cameras go on, it's very difficult to get that level of engagement and understanding, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I had that. Epic are one of these companies that has pinged up on my radar just in terms of timelines, because I think they seem to have quite an active employees. And then I had a chat with, I think the guy's name is Dan
Spencer.
Dan Spencer. He translated his story about what happened to him, which is so powerful and emotive.
Yeah,
it stood with me.
Yeah, and sometimes I've been asked when we were working with Epic Global Solutions and they were coming in and they were sharing their experiences, not just Dan Spencer, but his colleagues as well. And sometimes people would say to me, well, we've just sat here and listened to somebody tell their story about how they nearly lost their wife, nearly lost their life, nearly lost their jobs, how everything nearly came crashing down because of gambling. How is that training? I said, well, everybody needs to know why they're doing their job. And the reason why you're doing your job is because you'll never know, but trust me when I say you have stopped hundreds, if not thousands of people experiencing that sort of harm. The sad fact is you'll never know that, because if somebody does go down the route of addiction to anything, you see it. If you help somebody to stop it and it doesn't manifest, you'll never know. But
Yeah.
people need to be reassured that when they come to work and they talk to customers day in, day out, they're doing such a positive thing. They'll never eliminate problem gambling. There'll always be somebody who gambles a bit too much, same as there'll always be people who drink too much or human beings, we get addicted to everything. We go to the gym too much. Some people, we drink too much coffee, but unless we all sat around in bubbles, we never had any fun. There's nothing wrong with having a bet. There's nothing wrong with having a drink, but it's about making sure that everything is balanced in life. If you're going to the gym every night and never spending time with your wife or kids, it's a problem.
Yeah.
You see these people who are addicted to doing housework, but it's so important that people understand that, you're stopping people from experiencing these levels.
Yeah, I mean, there is that flip side, because going back to your point earlier about that sort of community aspect that retail, like independent bookmakers that you were working at or you were talking to, they knew about their customers. That's Ron. He works down the street or whatever, but they'd come in on a daily basis. And it is that sort. It's almost frowned upon a little bit for a bookmakers to be a community hub, but not a pub, which is commonly held as a community pub. But there's just not the belief that it is there. And the people of churches or religious people would frown on the pubs. And so it's that element, the community. And with modern technology, I think as well, is with the likes of WhatsApp, a lot of people are communicating, and that's sort of a form of engagement that people do, which at the same point, you've got to be really mindful of that it doesn't spiral out of control. And it's just getting those checks and measures in place to make sure that happens.
Of course, yeah. And with gambling on the internet, the amount of data that an operator has about how much time somebody is spending on their site, how much money they're spending on their site is astronomical. But it's what you choose to do with that data that's important, isn't it? Because if we can see that somebody is betting on your website at 3 o'clock in the morning, then a question needs to be asked. It might be perfectly fine. The same as, if somebody's having, drinking alcohol at 3 o'clock in the morning and they've got to go to work the next day, that becomes a problem then, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But we can see what people are betting on, when they're betting on it, how much they're spending, how much they're depositing, and how much they're withdrawing, and all sorts of things. I mean, if you say Dan Spencer told you his story, if my memory serves me right, he showed us bank statements where he would, for example, deposit £1.39 into his betting account because that is literally all he had in his bank account. And so with that level of data with online gambling, I think we're only scratching the surface of what we do with it, how much we can do.
And there is that discussion. I was talking to, I don't know whether you know him, Kieran Henry.
Name doesn't
There's a guy over in Ireland, really engaging guy as well, and he was talking about how operators maybe focus too much on sort of like that scale of like somebody's dropped £10,000 on this bet. Well, that £10,000 might be nothing if it's a high value person, whereas the £10 that somebody's, or the £1.39, and that's the very last penny that they've got, and they're spending it on gambling, may be more indicative. And that's where studying the behaviours and meshing all that data together. And I think we were talking about prior to hitting the record button, we were talking about how the importance and the practicalities of data being shared between operators being sort of you believe is one of the key wins that could possibly happen.
100%. Go from memory here. I think as of 2023, there was something like 4,800 separate gambling websites. 4,800. Why do we need 4,800 gambling websites? For me, and again, this is my opinion, that is ludicrous. It harks back to pre-internet, where if you had a betting shop on the high street, let's say Corals were on the high street, but you wanted to open up your Ladbroke shop, 50 yards down the road. You couldn't, because there's no way you could prove that there was a need for a Ladbroke shop 50 yards from a coral shop. The coral serves the community's needs of, if they want to place a bet, that's where they're going to place a bet. Then, obviously, the Labour government took that criteria away, and you could open up a coral shop next to a Paddy Power shop, next to a Betfred shop. So there was all of a sudden this mass immersion on the high street. And I think back to, well, you see it in London, high street, it's a mile long, would have 10 betting shops from 10 different brands on it. That's wrong. That's totally wrong. In my opinion, we don't need 4,800 gambling websites, etc. I'm not saying we should go down the route of a communist country and say, right, only one operator, and you're only allowed to bet £100 a month on gambling. We've all got freedom of choice. But the problem is this: I can deposit, let's say I deposit £10 with a gambling website. What they'll then do is they'll give me all sorts of bonuses, sign-up offers, bonuses, etc., to keep me playing with them. And my inbox, my email inbox will be flooded every day with offers. Then I'll deposit a fiver in another one, then a fiver in another one, then £10 another. I could just keep going. And none of them have sight of how much you're spending from each one. Now, like I say, Entain own about 25. I'm trying to think of Oaks about 5. Flutter's about 11, something like that anyway. I forget the exact numbers. And what they should do, if you place a bet with any Entain brand, the Entain have sight of that. So they know that if you've deposited £10 with Ladbrokes, Corals, B-Win, etc., they know that your spend with Entain is £30, yeah? Same with Evoke, same with Flutter. I'm not convinced that happens all the time. I still think there's cracks in the wall, whatever you want to call it, etc. But until we get to a place where, like the bank, if you deposit money from your bank account into any gambling operator's website, the same code, transaction code, comes up at the bank. And funny enough, you're probably aware of this, it affects your credit score in a negative way if you deposit money into a betting operator. So it's only your bank who can see exactly how much you deposited into betting accounts. Why can't that information be shared amongst all the operators? Because then we have a true picture of how much that person is depositing into betting accounts every single week, month, year, etc. And that needs to be for the purpose purely of player protection. And the same way, for example, if you apply for a credit card, if you've got 5 other credit cards, all maxed out to the limit, then you're not going to get offered a credit card. And you shouldn't, because the information is shared purely in the interest of not allowing people to get too much into debt. That information shared amongst gambling operators should never be used for marketing promotions. So, William Hill saying to Paddy Powers, etc., that person likes basketball, and then they promote basketball purely so that we can see how much people are spending to get a true picture, because there's too many people that are falling through the cracks because you go from one place to another.
Would that need third-party intermediary to oversee that?
There would need to be some sort of independent adjudicator there, because next year what they're implementing, and it's the operators that fall into the highest operating band of payments, etc. There's a group of operators that are trialing what's called frictionless vulnerability checks. It's quite a mouthful, isn't it? Frictionless vulnerability checks. So that if that person does deposit £25 into that operator's account, they're going to share that information with the other operators. Because from February 2025, if you deposit £150, if you reach that limit, that operator has to do some vulnerability checks. Any information that's in the public domain, have you got any CCJs against you, that type of thing. So there is going to be a trial next year. I don't know all the details of exactly which operators, but if that proves to be, as the title says, frictionless, there is the possibility, and it's not going to be overnight, but there is the possibility that some point in the future we'll get to the point where operators will share that information about that person. If these prove to be frictionless, I'm really hopeful that one day we can get to the point where the operators share. And I would really like to see much greater restrictions on the amount of gambling websites. Because I'd like a gambling website no different to opening up a betting shop. Why do we need 4,800 gambling operating websites? You don't.
I mean, one of the things that sort of piqued my interest there was that the banks, if you make a deposit to a bookmakers or a whatever, an operator, that it negatively affects your
That's the way.
credit score. Yeah, which I don't know whether I was just sort of been sort of putting my head in the sand on that sort of stuff, but like from an ethical viewpoint, I would say that's pretty questionable, just in terms of the fact that, you know, I guess, is it a financial thing? But then you could, you know, it could be, I don't know, you could do that with help people's health thing, that if they're eating a lot of, you know, making a lot of purchases at fast food outlets or whatever, that
It is a slippery slope, isn't it? Because we want people to have absolute freedom of choice. We don't want
yeah,
people to sit there and think, I won't treat myself to a KFC on the Friday night, because we want people to have fun and enjoy themselves. Of course, we do have freedom of choice. But when the bank has that level of information and the ability to help so many people, but for whatever reason doesn't, just affects their credit score if they make deposits. When you consider the amount of damage that banks and financial institutions have done over the years, the credit crunch and financial crisis, all that sort of stuff, I cannot see why it is not enforced. That information is readily available to an operator. So let's say I'm William Hills and you want to deposit £50 into and open up an account with me for £50. I should be able to see that over the course of the last year or 6 months or whatever, you have deposited X amount into betting accounts. Because at the minute, I don't know, you're to be a completely fresh face. Over the last 6 months, you might have lost 10 grand over loads and loads of different websites. I don't know that. That's information I don't have. If I don't have that information, I can't use that information to make sure that you gamble safely. I'm not going to. What I don't want to do is say, no, you're not betting, you're not depositing £50 because you'll just go somewhere else. You just go to the black market, etc.
mm-hmm.
But what I would make sure we do is we set up, for example, monthly deposit limits or a curfew that means you can't bet between, and this is one I'm a big fan of, you can't bet between the hours of 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. or between the hours 10 a.m. and 5 p.m. because I liken it to having a drink. If you go to work and you've got a hip flask, because that's from the old days, isn't it? They're silver hip flasks. And if you've got a silver hip flask full of whiskey and you're meant to be working and you're having a little sip of whiskey, how is that different than you've got your smartphone and you're having a bet on the football when you're meant to be working?
Yeah.
You see what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, if you're coming home and you've had too many drinks and you think, I know, I'll see what I can bet on. And there's, League Two match from South Korea that you know nothing about, that you're going to bet on. There's times to have a drink, there's times to have a bet.
Yeah.
You've got Lloyd's Bank. Lloyd's Bank is one of the, you can see exactly where you spend money every single month, whether it's Sainsbury's or Asda, wherever it is, etc. And yeah, you can see how much you've spent with gambling operators each month. But we don't do anything with
that. You've touched on a couple of points here, but you mentioned a couple of things about monthly limits and sharing that data. And everything that you've mentioned there makes eminent sense to me. And I'd say I class myself as one of those fortunate people that haven't been subjected to gambling harm, personally or with my close network. But anybody who, with those there where you're sort of like doing time limits or monthly spend amounts or percentages, that sounds eminently reasonable from my viewpoint. But if you were in the midst of a gambling problem, for want of a better word, wouldn't you'd just game your way out of that, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I mean, with these tools, as they call them, deposit limits, spend limits, timeouts, call-off periods, etc. Yeah, you can wiggle your way out of them. You've spent ridiculously high deposit limits. There you go. You've circumnavigated the whole purpose of it. There needs to be, with these deposit limits and these tools, they need to be, in my opinion, enforced. So that for example, if you open an account with William Hills, you have to have a deposit limit of X amount of money per month. You can't, you can't put in £5,000. It sounds draconian, but this £150 limit as of February 2025 really hits the mark, because we take the average annual salary in this country. I think it's something like 30 grand, isn't it? 32 grand is the average annual salary of somebody in the UK. But then if that person's got children, as I think you and I both well know, that a lot of that money doesn't go on us, it goes on the children. And if you've got a mortgage, you've got to pay that. If you've got a car, you've got to pay that. Energy bills are meant to go up. So £150 is, I think, the right amount. If you want to set a deposit limit higher than that, then you need to be willing to show evidence of increased levels of income, whether it's a much higher salary, evidence of, for example, wealth or other property that you own, something like that, to justify, I don't want to spend £150. I want to spend £300 a month, and I can afford it because of, etc. And I know it sounds draconian, but we're not trying to stop people having fun. We're trying to help people have fun. Because if you lose more money than you can afford, it ain't fun, etc.
Yeah.
So I think that's one thing. These tools need to be enforceable. I think they need to be in place whenever you open up an account. And I think if somebody does get themselves into the midst of an addiction of gambling, then it's not right that an operator says, we're going to close your accounts, because that's just like we wash our hands of you. I think, this is all, and again, this is all about industry, collating information. That person needs to have, let's say they've got 10 accounts with 10 different operators, all but one need to be closed down, and that person needs to be able to gamble with one operator on a monthly basis for a nominal amount, £40, £50, something like that. Because like with any addiction, whether it's drugs or alcohol, like if you said to anybody, right, stop drinking, full stop tomorrow, who's an alcoholic, they're doomed to fail. Same with drugs, etc. There needs to be a gradual, weaning of it. Simple as that.
You just made a perfect point there, because just on that sort of element where you're talking about sort of addicts and people that are in the midst of these battles, you can't just cut them off, because they'd just drive them somewhere else and somewhere unregulated. And essentially, when somebody has made the decision that they need help or they want to be helped, then they need to be surrounded by their family, by their friends, by their loved ones, but also by structures and organizations and processes that will help them overcome harms. And, if they're gambling, it can have a cohesive approach to helping these people. I think that's ultimately the end game.
Yeah, because anybody who says that person's an alcoholic, why don't they should stop drinking, or that person is a gambling addict, why don't they just stop gambling, or drugs, whatever the addiction is. Somebody who says that has never experienced addiction of any nature, because people poo it too much. They say, oh, why don't you just stop drinking? It doesn't work like that. We're human beings. We're made up of all these weird and wonderful chemicals, which endorphins that go off when we have a bet and have a drink and that type of thing. And it's extremely complicated. And somebody who wants to move away from an addiction needs to have the support, like you say, of family and friends, but also the support and help of somebody or a company that hasn't got financial or emotional attachment to that individual. Because, for example, a wife trying to help their husband wean off an alcohol problem has experienced not in all cases, but has experienced the potentially violent nature of a drunk, the alcoholic husband, or etc. Or a wife trying to help a husband come off a drug addiction has experienced the financial implications of drug addiction. Whereas that company, they're attached, but not emotionally attached. So rather than just an operator saying, we don't want your business anymore, and just sort of washing their hands, that person should be allowed to bet, but only one operator, a certain amount each month. Because what you'll find is very quickly, different for everybody, but after a period of time, it'll just get boring. It'll just get boring because they'll be having a bet, but the buzz is gone, and they'll gradually wean off it. Because in my experience, so many people have experienced problems with gambling. I think, if I remember rightly, Dan Spencer he had a big win on the horses, I think it was actually, very early on when he started gambling. And all of a sudden you think, well, this is a way of making money. And not just that, you get that buzz, that buzz when the three bells comes up on the fruit machine, or the buzz you get, or if you think back to when you first went out and had a drink, but you never get that same buzz again And when people have a
Yeah.
big win early on, that is a massive red flag, because that person needs to be very closely monitored.
Yeah. Well, it's that feels like a pretty good time to end this podcast. I just really wanted to thank you for being on this episode today. And that last few thoughts that you just gave there really gives me hope about the industry and the people working in it, because I just feel that this industry needs people like you in it, to put the players and to put communities first, and to have genuine, authentic people who are seeking to keep it what it is, which is a fun activity, and just to keep an eye out for people that are falling between the cracks and developing harm. I think, yeah. So thanks a million for
No, my
coming
pleasure.
on. If anyone wants to reach out to you, what's the best place they can contact you?
Best way, just go to my LinkedIn profile. Simple as that. That'll be the best way.
Excellent. Okay. All right. Well, thanks again. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you have liked it, please comment, like, share, and subscribe. That's all for now. Thanks very much.
Thank you.